Hey, welcome to our blockchain massively simplified session. Full disclosure, our inspiration for this session actually comes from Trailblazer Richie Edwaru, presenting this topic back in 2017. And you can view the original video in the link provided and a great insightful TEDx Morrison Town talk. So highly recommended when you get a chance. Let us know in the chat and the comments how you're coming in. Are you high energy? Are you green, yellow, red? Green for high energy, yellow, okay energy, red, you're running on fumes, but you're making it work. It's a Friday. So just wanted to take a few seconds to thank our sponsors, OpenEXO and Rutanio. As part of their support, they are providing token grants to the startup community to catalyze more peer-to-peer value exchange. More on this later and in the upcoming sessions in this series. But thank you again to OpenEXO and Rutanio. A little bit about me. I'm an ambassador for EXO and Rutanio. I lead startup programming and events across the US and Canada for Techstars. I also help with local events with 1863 Ventures. And my massive transformative purpose is to accelerate human connection. So anything I do is really to create connections for everyone in the community. But enough about me. You're here to wrap your mind around this blockchain technology. So first, let me take you to the ground floor of the internet. This is what the internet actually looked like roughly 45 years ago in 1976. 1776, the internet was just a couple of computers, a dozen of dots, if I may, loosely connected by some lines that can barely carry a couple of bits and bytes between them. Not that much. Today, you're more or less watching this video on YouTube, using the internet from the comfort of your own house without a wire connected to the device that you're watching this video on. Now, in order for us to go from where we were, which are these couple of dots, to where we are today, a lot had to happen. People like Wim Cerf, Elise Gerrich, Ida Holes, and many others had to dream about what the world could be like. How could we change the world? And here we are 45 years after. Now, the thing about great inventions and great paradigms like the internet is you actually don't know what it is the day it was made. You kind of have hindsight. 45 years after, and you look at it and you go, oh, I see what that did. It did the following thing. And the question or the discussion we're going to have today is, if there was a paradigm sitting in front of us today, what can we do to figure out what that paradigm is going to do 45 years from now, so that we could take advantage of it, so that we can be a part of what Ida Holes and others did to the internet. So in order to do that, in order to get ahead, you have to ask what I like to call the big question. And the big question about any paradigm is, what is the one thing, what is the one gap that paradigm fills for everyone? Now, I said hindsight is easy. Hindsight is 20/20, but foresight, now that's where it gets difficult. So let's take a look at hindsight. If we think about some of the large inventions in our life, like the printing press, for example, in the 1400s, the printing press filled an interesting gap. It filled what I like to call the knowledge gap. At that time, knowledge only came to the anointed. Someone special would get a clay pot with the name of kings on it, and that's how knowledge came from the gods. The printing press was invented and completely closed that knowledge gap. If we take a look at something like the engine, that invention, what gap did it fill? Well, it filled the power gap at the time we wanted to manufacture, and all we had was manpower, slavery, colonialism. The engine helped get rid of all that. And then our favorite invention, the internet, started 45 years ago. You look at it and you go, I'm not sure what it does today. I like to think of it as filling the distance gap. The world is a lot smaller than it was 45 years ago. Today, you can transact with just about anyone from just about any distance away. We're here to talk about the next gap that exists. And there's a gap that is building in our society. And there's an invention, as you would imagine, that fills that gap. That invention is called the blockchain. Now, this is an oversimplified version of blockchain. Let me say that again. This is an oversimplified version of blockchain. For all those blockchain experts that exist in the world, save all the details for the comments. We're going to have an oversimplified conversation. Today, we're around the ground floor of blockchain. And what I want to talk about is what is the gap that it fills so that we can look forward and see what the world could look like and take advantage of it. So blockchain changes something that is very fundamental to us. It's at the core of who we are. And each of us do it hundreds of times a day. What blockchain is going to change. It's going to change the way we trust. Not just how we trust each other, but more specifically, how we trust in business. Now, you can go and say, wow, trust in business. I trust all the businesses I operate with today. Of course I do. I trust my government. I trust my news. I trust everyone. Now, I'm being funny here, folks. But trust is actually very, very core to business. Trust in business started very early on, from caveman days all the way through the mercantile economy to the industrial age. And today in the information age, we have come to the conclusion as a species that I have to trust you in order to transact with you. So yes, trust is fundamental currency of commerce. Think about if we just stopped trusting all companies or governments. Commerce would come to a bit of a halt. Now, trust itself is very delicate. It's poignant. It's close to us. It's easily breakable. And yet somehow we're able to trust each other and transact $100 trillion a year. Between the 7 billion of us on this planet, this little delicate thing called trust, some way, somehow, we're able to do it this many times per year. But here, the fact is, we actually manufacture that trust. In order to transact, we manufacture trust. And when I exchange my hard-earned dollars with you for a good or service, I have to trust you, and so we manufacture that trust. Let's talk a little bit about the manufacturing of that trust. Now, full disclosure, we're about to begin the massive simplification of blockchain. All right, so just go with me here. All right, so let's talk about how we manufacture trust today in order to talk about trust so that you can really get a sense as to what I mean by blockchain is going to change the way we trust. Let's imagine that we're about to buy a house. Now, we have invented this thing in society called the ledger. I'm not talking about Heath Ledger, the actor, the ledger, like in bookkeeping, entries, debits, and credits. And the ledger is the fundamental way that we go about storing information about transactions today. For this house, for example, if we need to get a record of who owns this house and what happened to it, we would store that information in a ledger that looks like this. First, the house is built, then it's constructed. And there are some changes that go with it. It had some violations here and there, but eventually we would be able to get a record of this house before we buy it. Anyone here ever bought a house or sold a house? How long does it take to get this information? You have to go to a title company. And a scary stat here, 30% of the titles in the US have errors in them. You see, the problem with ledgers that we use today, which we depend on to trust many things, not just houses, is that someone as easily as they can write a record, they can delete a record from the ledger. Can you imagine buying a house and you go to the homeowner for the ledger and they go, yes, of course I can. Here's the title. I've kept it all up to date. Please have it. Would you trust them? Likely no, because the information can be tampered with. You don't know. The ledgers that we use today to transact with, whether it's a house, a car, the rights to some piece of art, or someone who wants a piece of intellectual property or a patent, they are tamperable. You can tamper with them. And what makes it worse is not only can you remove a record, you can also add or edit a record. As you can see here, that chimney violation that happened to this house somehow now is a new chimney instead. I bet you'd be paying an unwarranted price you don't really want to pay for that house. So we have this capability called the ledger. We use it, it's tamperable, and we could trust a little bit. but it's sort of in this state of commerce where we have to trust but verify. Anybody knows who made famous the phrase trust but verify? Add it to the comments if anybody does know. Okay, the truth is today as a civilization, when we start companies or we start transactions, we start with an automatic assumption that the counterparty cannot be trusted. When we start companies or we start transactions today, we start with the automatic assumption that the counterparty cannot be trusted. It almost feels normal to us. Kind of feels like, oh yeah, I mean, why would we not do that? But does it have to be that way? It's just something that we've become accustomed to. And the way we've gone about that is we establish these things called intermediaries to solve for it. It's a fancy word for middlemen and middlewomen, intermediaries. These are entities that are responsible for keeping a centralized copy of the ledgers in all of commerce. And they facilitate the brokering of the relationship between those who are looking to trust and those who are looking to be trusted. Examples of intermediaries are things like banks, the Department of Motor Vehicles. It's a great intermediary for identity. Mortgage and title companies, credit reporting agencies. These are all intermediaries. This is just a small example of the intermediaries that we deal with today. And the reason why we deal with them is because we simply can't trust the ledgers that we have. Now, the intermediaries don't actually get us all the way there. If you think about operating in zero trust with commerce would come to a stalling halt, and abundant trust now. The intermediaries kind of get us to a point where we can manufacture some, and the rest of it comes from the gut. The fact is, commerce and the state that it is in today, we sort of exist in this trust gap. Now, just a reminder that this is the oversimplification, and it's still happening. So let's talk a little bit about blockchain to get a sense as to what blockchain is and what it does. And as you would imagine, blockchain has a ledger as well. Now, the blockchain ledger is an epic upgrade on the ledger that we have today. There's a couple of things that are very, very interesting about it. The first thing that's interesting about the blockchain ledger is every record that's written on a blockchain ledger has a unique key that goes with it. Now, you don't need to get into the details of cryptography or hash keys and so on. There's a really, really awesome unhackable key that's on every record on a blockchain ledger. The other thing that happens to blockchain is that every record is written and stamped by the trusted party that wrote the record. You can see how this is a little bit different from the crappy ledger we use today, more or less. Here's the major invention, though. When the next record is written, everything from the first record, including the key and the contents of the second record, is put into that formula, and out comes a key for the second record. You can see there's some dependency now. When the third record is written, the third record, same things happens. All of the contents of record number 1, including the key, and the contents of record number 2, including the key, goes into the formula, and out comes a key for the third record. You can see how the dependency from one record to another is different from what we do today. Now, again, we're in the oversimplification zone. There's going to be a lot of comments about cryptography and hash keys. And yes, that's all important, but this is the fundamental difference. And this happens on and on and on and on. Essentially, technology making sure that every single record, we can see who wrote the record. We can add a key to that record, and we can build dependencies between one record or another, essentially chaining all of the records together. Aha! Now you see where the word chain comes from in blockchain. And here's what happens. If someone that doesn't like that failed chimney inspection decides to remove that very quickly with an algorithm, you can apply it and look at the information and recognize that it was tampered with. That is the difference between how we exist today as commerce and how we will exist tomorrow in the future. Essentially, we're in a world where we can start to take advantage of a ledger that is immutable, meaning, yes, you can mess with it, but it's really easy to tell the ones that were tampered with as opposed to the ones that are not tampered with. Now, blockchains usually exist in what is called communities. What you find is that participants that operate in an industry will all operate on the same chain so that each participant in the industry has a copy of the information so they can write to the ledger with each other. Now, this helps with sharing, the transaction throughput, etc. You could call this the real estate change, if I may. We're still talking about the house that we're building. Obviously, there's going to be healthcare chains, there's going to be financial services chains, there'll be all industry chains, and eventually we may see a chain of change. Now, if someone happens to interfere with one of those ledgers, let's say something happens, a consensus algorithm runs, looks at all the rest of the ledgers and says, hey, you're the one that's out. And it gets replaced by a copy of those that still has the good information. New blocks of transactions appear. They get written on top of the collection of ledgers. New blocks of transactions appear, they get written on top of it. And eventually we get into a situation where what you're looking at is what is called a distributed immutable ledger. Now I want to pause and make sure we take inventory here. It's a lot of information. We talked about inventions, large paradigms, trust, and a trust gap. How do we bridge that trust gap today with ledgers that we can tamper with? And now we're looking at a completely different ledger, one that is immutable, shared across organizations that operate on a specific chain and now distributed. If you look on the left side of this chart, you'll see a state of commerce that uses ledgers that are tamperable, requiring intermediaries that own a centralized copy of it that broker the relationship between those who are looking for trust and those who are looking to be trusted. And as a result, we live in this trust gap. On the right-hand side of this is a very different view of commerce, where information can be trusted and available in real time. Now, I want you to think about this house that we were buying. Can you imagine if the information about the ownership rights of this house was written on a blockchain? How much time would that take out of the process to get the title information, right? How much friction would it take out? And how much fraud would it take out? Much less the cost. This is the power of blockchain. Now, we saw that in the large paradigms that we looked at, we saw things like the printing press destroy those organizations that were only anointed with knowledge. We saw the combustion engine destroy things like colonialism and slavery. We saw the internet come in and destroy brick and mortar companies who didn't adapt. What we're looking at today is a new invention called blockchain that changes the way we trust. And I believe trust companies are going to destroy at a minimum these intermediaries. We will simply trust in a different way. The human experience is going to change as fundamentally as it changed from the printing press, from the combustion engine, and from the creation of the internet. Now, this is the official end of the simplification. So where do we go from here? The reason why blockchain is so interesting to me and why is it that I continue to study it and participate in it is that the trust gap that we talked about is actually increasing. We are transacting with more things in more ways than we ever have. If you look at this concept of zero trust and abundant trust, you can see that need to trust is actually stretching out to the right. Today, you not only transact with human beings, you transact with machines, you transact with smart devices. And all of these things, we need to start to figure out how to trust them properly. Now, blockchain changes other things that I'm particularly interested in. One is the area of smart homes and cities. Think about all the devices and sensors that are coming online and interacting that we also have to trust, not just human beings. I think the last prediction that I saw was that by 2030, each person will own about 15 connected devices. That's about 105 trillion smart devices in 2030 that we will have to transact with and trust. And this is what I mean by the trust gap is expanding. The other area where the trust gap is expanding is in reputation. We talk about reputation. I'm not just talking about the phantom Yelp reviewer that you see that writes a restaurant about how there was only 5 shrimp in the meal as opposed to the 6 that was supposed to be there. I'm not just talking about those people. I'm talking about the 250,000 rides a day that's happening between Uber and Lyft. I'm talking about the 100,000 transactions on Etsy. I'm talking about the 150,000 rooms that are rented per night on Airbnb. These are all reputational opportunities. Now we continue to manufacture trust with our gut, putting ourselves at risk. This is what I mean by the trust gap is expanding. To the extent when I think about blockchain, I don't only think about blockchain replacing intermediaries. I think about blockchain creating trust mechanisms to replace traditional forms of exchange, like good old bartering over fiat currency. We can trust and barter through utility tokens or non-fungible tokens, engage in more peer-to-peer value exchange to collaborate more with one another, to grow and accelerate as a community. This is the power of the distributed ledger. Going a step further, every company in the world today, not just the intermediaries, may be at risk of having competition from a blockchain version of themselves. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're at the ground floor of a new paradigm in humanity that will change the human experience called blockchain. The thing that is going to change is trust. And major thanks again to Trailblazer Richie Edouard presenting this topic back in 2017. You can view the original video in the link provided, and a great and insightful TEDx Morrison Town Talk. Highly, highly recommended. Any questions, comments, concerns, add them in the chat and we'll get to them as best we can. Oh, and to circle back on the cliffhanger, the phrase trust but verify was made famous by Ronald Reagan back in 1987 after signing the INF Treaty with Mikhail Gorbachev. The concept of trust but verify, obviously an oxymoron. It makes sense when you consider that the word but is often an eraser word. Little stat there. Blockchain, yes, it is complex, but it doesn't need to be. Right? As long as you know the basics right now, you can start dipping the toe into the potential of what blockchain can bring. And as a business, you want to know where these technologies going to affect business, in what way, and then how can you leverage those changes to grow and accelerate your own business. How do we start using blockchain? There's different ways to use it. I think at the very least, start reading about it, listening to this video, and wrapping your head around it is one way. We're going to unveil the use of tokens over the next few sessions. So you'll be able to see how can you leverage utility tokens like Exos and Rutas to collaborate with one another to do more bartering and exchanging of services with them. And that way you can all grow together based on the strengths and weaknesses that you all kind of share with each other. So again, overcoming challenges as a community through utility tokens. Just a reminder that we have a summer series to introduce you and help explore the blockchain landscape with a focus on founders and business owners. We'll be exploring next how to leverage utility tokens like Exos and Rutas to dip your toe into the blockchain landscape through a peer-to-peer value exchange mechanism. For our Latino and Latina brothers and sisters, we'll also deliver that session in Spanish to facilitate a smoother entry into all of this. A lot of information. And of course, we want to catalyze more value exchange between businesses to grow and accelerate the startup community to drive positive impact. More growth, more revenue, more jobs, more economic impact. It's all a chain. Did you notice chain tie-in again? All right. And for those who want to learn more about exponential technologies and mindset to build more effective business models for tomorrow's market disruptions, join in the monthly EXO meetups. We focus on one of the 11 attributes every month, like Uber and Lyft use leverage, abundance, and leapfrog traditional business models. Airbnb has more rooms than Marriott hotels, or Uber and Lyft has more vehicles and operators than taxi companies. They use the attribute of leveraged assets to accomplish that goal. So, ladies and gentlemen, it has been my absolute pleasure. Thank you, and we hope to see you at the upcoming sessions.